The reputation of The Exorcist is almost as legendary as the film itself, and although I'm not as into horror films as I once was, I am looking forward to reviewing this one. The reputation of this film is that it's one of the scariest films ever made, and in the cinema it caused fainting, heart attacks, and apparently even a miscarriage. I'm not pregnant as far as I'm aware, and I didn't have any adverse reactions on my first viewing, but I have to take these things into consideration for this classic from 1973, which is still considered one of the scariest films ever made, even now 50 years later. Let's see how it holds up today. Here's my review of The Exorcist. Chris MacNeil is the star of Crash Course, a movie filming at a nearby church. At a party held at her house, Chris's normally happy-go-lucky daughter Regan comes downstairs and tells the director Burke that he's going to die from a great height and pees on the floor. Chris takes her daughter to be tested, and the theory is that she has a brain lesion, although the battery of tests show that her brain is absolutely fine. Regan's behaviour gets worse over time, starting with writhing and the bed violently shaking, but progressing to her head turning 180 degrees, sores on her body, and a deeper voice coming out of her mouth spewing obscenities. After the doctors fail to diagnose her and a psychiatrist gets bitten after trying to hypnotise her, a local priest, Father Damien Karras, finds the MacNeil family after being contacted by Lieutenant Kinderman, a homicide detective investigating Burke's death. He hypothesises that Burke could have only died from Regan's window, and his head was twisted all the way round before he fell down the stairs outside. Father Karras, who specialises in psychiatry, is reluctant to perform an exorcism as requested by Chris, but after meeting Regan and the demon within her, he convinces the church to perform the ritual, led by Father Merrin, an elderly priest who only recently returned from an archaeological dig in Iraq, and someone who is not in the best of health. Father Karras assists, and the first round seems to go well. However, when Father Karras goes in alone, the demon antagonises him until Father Merrin dismisses him. When checking up on him later, Father Karras finds Father Merrin dead on the floor, and Regan is now unbound. He attacks the young girl and begs for the demon to take his body instead. It does so, and Father Karras jumps out of the window, down the stairs outside, and dies in the arms of his colleague Father Dyer. The next morning, the MacNeils move out of the house, and Regan gives Father Dyer the pendant found on the floor of her room. You may notice that my plot summary was a bit shorter than normal, and that's because the story is pretty straightforward. I don't think everything is explained fully, and some issues remain unresolved, but there's nothing that breaks the film's main narrative. I would have liked more explanation on how Regan got possessed in the first place. It's heavily implied that the demon was transported in a statuette head, which eventually ended up at the scene of Burke's death. The pendant given to Father Dyer at the end was also found with the statuette in Iraq, and again I would have liked more explanation as to what the significance of the medallion is. In further research, the medal is a St. Joseph's medal used to ward off evil. Father Karras wears it until the fight with Regan when it's ripped off, at which point the demon transfers into his body, but I had to look this up afterwards when it really should be explained in the film. Also, I didn't pick up on the demon's name, Pazuzu, which I can't hear without thinking of
Pazuzu, you ungrateful gargoyle! I put you through college, and this is how you repay me?
The other reason the summary was so short is that for about 40 minutes, nothing much happens. The Exorcist has a slow build-up, and a third of the film's 2-hour runtime is giving lots of information, not all of it relevant and not all of it fully informative. The other 2/3 though is gripping, well-paced and tense, and I think the main reason for that is the lack of music throughout. The film's soundtrack is very minimalist. One theme used a couple of times throughout, but not only does the track Tubular Bells capture the tense, spooky atmosphere of the film, but when it's used quietly in the background of things like Chris walking home to add atmosphere. It's a great song and ties the film together. The fact that not much else plays, music-wise, means that in quiet scenes at the house, you expect something to happen suddenly, and so you're tense throughout those scenes. What I really credit this film for though is not using jump scares. The Nun, take note, this is how you do a scary religious based horror. I was expecting a scene that I remembered my first viewing, and unfortunately it turns out that this was in the extended director's cut, which included 10 extra minutes. The scene itself is the infamous crab walk, which is so memorable. It's the only thing I could remember well over a decade later. I recommend the oddly named Version You've Never Seen edition to include this scene. When you go through the cast, there aren't a lot of well-known names, and casting was really tough from what I've learnt. A-lister names including Audrey Hepburn, Jack Nicholson and Jane Fonda were all considered, but in the end, Ellen Burstyn was cast as Chris and Jason Miller was cast as Father Karras, and they work really well together in my opinion. You don't always need well-known actors to play the right roles, so long as you pick the right actors. Linda Blair is probably the most well-known cast member, but mainly because The Exorcist made her career. Character-wise, I like that the slow 40-minute build-up gave us plenty of instances of Regan being a typical happy-go-lucky child, Chris being a caring parent, Father Karras being conflicted. This is why I don't hate that it started off slow, because by the time the final 2/3 kick in, you know all you need to about the characters, even if you don't know everything about the lore. The glaring omission to this though is Regan's father. He was supposed to call on Regan's birthday and didn't. We're told that he's informed on Regan's condition, but we don't see or hear from him at all. He's a worse dad than Drew from Tully, if you can believe that. Personally, I think it would have been tidier to have the dad be dead, and that is not a sentence I say very often. The Exorcist legacy goes well beyond its cinema release though. It was banned here in the UK for years from 1984 to 1999 and was only shown on terrestrial TV for the first time in 2001. The scene that may disturb people the most though, especially if they're not religious, is the angiography scene. When it comes to realistic gore, I can be a bit of a wimp, and so this really realistic looking scene did make me feel a little bit queasy. Apparently though, this scene was so realistic, it was used in training videos for radiologists, so much credit to the direction there. There's also mention of subliminal messages during some of the scenes, namely the padded bedpost creating shadows against the wall, and some of the flashing images, but this has been widely debunked. I mean, who put subliminal messages in their video? Aside from being heavily criticised though, The Exorcist was also recognised in its time, nominated for 10 Oscars and winning 2 for Best Sound and Best Screenplay based on a material from another medium, given that the film is based on William Peter Blatty's novel, which he himself adapted to the screen. As I've said before and will do again, where there are successful films, there are sequels, and my goodness, there are a lot of sequels. 1977, just 4 years later, saw Exorcist II: The Heretic, which also starred Linda Blair and Max von Sydow from the original, and it's rated badly, like really badly. I may have to give this a look at some point to see how bad it really is. Then, another 4 years later, is a film called The Ninth Configuration, which seems to be rated more positively. 10 years later, after that, in 1990, when The Exorcist was still banned in the UK, The Exorcist 3 was released, which did fine and features Samuel L. Jackson in a minor role. In 2004, a prequel was released called Exorcist: The Beginning, and then a year later, Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, both of which claim to be alternate versions of an Exorcist prequel. Seriously though, 5 films so far, a potential trilogy reboot. This might be the most complicated set of films I've had to research so far. Hi there, this is 2024 Bradley J here, just with a quick update on that trilogy. So following the poor review scores of The Exorcist Believer released in 2023, the latest is that the sequel trilogy will be scrapped. I will say that having Ellen Burstyn and Linda Blair in the most recent release is a nice touch though. Let's not forget the TV series though, which ran for 2 seasons between 2016 and 2017. Amazingly, there was also a stage show from 2012 until 2019. From what I can see, critics didn't really like it, but fans did. I suppose that's how it goes really. Names such as Sir Ian McKellen and Brooke Shields were involved in the cast at some point. Linda Blair would also reprise her role in the spoof film Repossessed, which released in 1990 and also starred Leslie Nielsen. Now I would watch this one, but unfortunately it's unavailable in the UK. I'd need a VPN to watch it, but since no one wanted to sponsor this video, I'm sorry I can't recommend one. So in my opinion, is The Exorcist one of the greatest horror films ever made? Yes. Simply put, this is a standard bearer in making the viewer feel tense, uncomfortable in the right way, and gripped throughout. Horror fans should already have seen The Exorcist because it holds up nearly 50 years later. Better than Jaws, I'd say. You could argue that it's even ahead of its time given its banning until recent years. And I think, horror fan or not, this classic piece of cinema deserves a watch. It may not be perfect, but it's still very effective, and I highly recommend it, with the caveat of the version you've never seen edition. The power of Bradley J compels you to see this one. Thank you for watching this video. If you like what you see, please give this video a like and share it on social media. Maybe leave a comment below about what you thought of this video. And if you'd like to see more, please subscribe for more content. If you'd like to support me in other ways, you can buy merchandise at bradleyj.tmail.com, where you can buy t-shirts, tote bags and more. Or you can become a Patreon at www.patreon.com/BradleyJVoices for just £1 a month. Coming up next for the Film Review Open Challenge is The Matrix. For now though, thank you very much for watching.